Imagine Chicago in late January 1967. It was an ordinary weekday. Kids heading to class, adults off to jobs, just another chilly dawn in a town accustomed to heavy snowfalls. The weather report hinted at flurries, a light dusting that might catch your eye but wouldn't derail the schedule. Classrooms were buzzing with students, skyscrapers were humming with activity. Commuter rails chugged along without issue. Little did anyone suspect that before long, the entire metropolis would grind to a halt. Come mid-morning, roadways vanished under the buildup. By lunchtime, public buses ground to a stop right in their tracks. Rail cars overflowed with commuters who abruptly grasped they might be stranded overnight. Unlike tempests that strike under cover of night, this one barreled in while throngs were scattered across the urban sprawl, at desks, in lessons, en route. Gradually, what seemed like a minor inconvenience morphed into chaos beyond comprehension. Vehicles lay forsaken amid the drifts. Workplaces morphed into impromptu havens. Educational buildings doubled as overnight dorms. The populace didn't descend into frenzy. It simply came to a standstill. We're talking about the infamous 1967 blizzard, not due to surprise flakes, but because nobody foresaw how swiftly a typical day could vanish beneath them. Hit that subscribe button and support us in hitting our 1,000 subscriber milestone. Much appreciated. Early on Thursday, January 26, 1967, at 5:30 a.m., the Windy City lingered in pre-dawn shadows, yet hummed with early energy. Inside a sturdy brick home on the south side, Margaret placed her percolator atop the burner and flicked on the countertop radio. The meteorologist noted incoming precipitation. Naturally, it was peak winter in Chicago. Wintry weather was woven into the fabric of daily existence. Folks layered up. They navigated roads more cautiously. Life pressed onward. Margaret's spouse departed for the foundry at 6 o'clock sharp. Her trio of kids spooned down porridge around the table, groggy and reluctant to brave the frosty trek to class. The eldest, a 12-year-old lad, griped about his footwear pinching. Margaret urged him to quit whining and lace them up regardless. She couldn't have predicted those shoes would carry her boy through an ordeal etched in his memory forever. Throughout the sprawl, in countless households mirroring Margaret's, identical routines unfolded. Dads commuting to plants, moms preparing midday meals, young ones plodding to educational centers. The urban heart pulsed as ever, frigid yet operational, overcast but in motion. Around 7 o'clock, initial crystals drifted down. Initially, scant notice was taken. The city had weathered blizzards aplenty in the past. Residents boasted of their resilience, of plowing paths and sustaining transit no matter the elements. The downfall intensified slightly by 8 o'clock, more so by 9 o'clock. Then a shift occurred. At 10 o'clock, the precipitation wasn't merely descending. It assaulted with ferocity. Gale force blasts up to 50 miles per hour hurled the crystals horizontally, stinging like pins on bare flesh. Sight lines shrank to mere yards. The heavens, once a standard slate hue, bleached into oblivion. Not cloudy white, but an utter void, as if reality itself had been blanked out. In the loop's heart, professionals clustered by panes and observed boulevards below fading away. At the outset, they quipped lightly. "Looks like real weather's hitting." Soon the levity evaporated. The transit halted as well. Scores of CTA vehicles idled inertly along Michigan Avenue, State Street, and every primary artery in town. Motors humming, riders confined within. Certain vehicles had been immobilized for an hour, then 2, then more. Operators advanced nowhere, retreated nowhere, only lingered as accumulations mounted beside, atop, entombing them in place. That's the moment folks comprehended this transcended a routine squall. It was a beast altogether different. Allow me to describe the rails. Chicago's iconic elevated network, the renowned L, formed the urban spine. It ferried roughly 500,000 souls daily. Come rain, sleet, or gale, the L persisted. That was the vow. That's what locals relied upon. On that fateful January 26, 1967, the L shattered that vow. By midday, numerous cars iced immobile upon their lines. Not merely lagging or postponed, utterly locked. The electrified third rail fueling the grid lay smothered in powder and frost. Points meant to route cars between paths refused to shift. Picture yourself aboard such a conveyance. You hopped on around noon, anticipating a quick 30-minute commute back. Now it's 3 p.m., then 5 p.m. The cars have sat unmoving for ages. Warmth seeps away beyond the glass. Gazing out yields only blankness. The gales howl against the frame, swaying it side to side. 60 fellow travelers cram your compartment. Mostly unfamiliar faces. A few weep, others murmur pleas. Some gaze blankly ahead, grappling with how an everyday journey transformed into a horror tale. A female rider on one immobilized car that afternoon would later recount enduring on her feet for 7 hours, seat shortages be damned. She was 3 months along in her pregnancy. When relief crews finally accessed her ride, sensation had fled her toes. Yet another traveler, a gentleman in his 60s, suffered a cardiac seizure aboard a halted beside the Howard station. A man collapsed inside a stalled train car. The other riders on board attempted to assist him, yet they were powerless to act. The doors wouldn't budge, and no one could get through to emergency services. They remained by his side as he slipped away, confined within an immobilized rail car that was stuck fast in the ice. Such tragedies weren't one-offs. Throughout Chicago, the nightmare repeated itself endlessly. Countless individuals were confined to rail cars they couldn't escape, hoping against hope for aid that often failed to arrive. Yet the real shocker came next. The rail system wasn't even the biggest horror. The city's roads had transformed into vast lots of deserted vehicles, not neatly parked, but forsaken in chaos. As the gale-force blizzard peaked near noon, throngs of motorists ended up immobilized in gridlock that ground to a halt. This wasn't mere congestion or aggravating delays. It was utter standstill, as if the entire urban sprawl had been encased in solid ice. Initially, those behind the wheel reacted in typical fashion. They endured, blared their horns, and crept ahead whenever possible. But with time dragging on and flakes piling relentlessly, reality sank in. Mobility was a lost cause. Not for the rest of that day, perhaps not for several to come. Thus, they began to abandon ship on foot. Imagine Lakeshore Drive, that iconic American thoroughfare with its 8 lanes hugging Lake Michigan's edge, usually buzzing with vehicles cruising at 60 miles per hour. Come the afternoon of January 26th, it brimmed with a different sight. Folks by the hundreds, swelling to thousands, ditching their rides right there and braving the tempest, since hunkering down spelled certain hypothermia. Gusts sweeping from the lake were merciless, 20, 30, even 40 degrees below zero factoring in the wind. Snow had already built up to knee-height in spots, deepening rapidly. These weren't adventurers geared for Arctic treks. They were typical commuters in loafers, ladies in stilettos, executives wrapped in coats suited for a quick dash from cab to entrance, not endurance. Still, they pressed on. A few reached nearby hotels. Others found refuge in still operating office towers. Some were welcomed into the dwellings of kind strangers who spotted their faltering figures and ushered them in. Tragically, not all succeeded. The following dawn, rescuers discovered Edward's body, stiff from the cold just 50 feet from a service station that might have spared him. He'd lost his bearings amid the blinding squall and passed it unseen. Dorothy, another victim, tumbled into a drift mere steps from her residence. Folks in the area unearthed her the next day while clearing paths. These weren't daredevils or the imprudent. They were everyday residents of Chicago, rising that morning to what they anticipated as a routine Thursday. By dusk, fatalities among them mounted. The toll eventually climbed to about 60. Yet amid the peril, tales of endurance emerged by the thousands from this cataclysm. Returning to the south side, that 12-year-old lad, squeezed into his ill-fitting pair of boots, found himself marooned at his school. Robert was his name. As the fury descended, officials grasped the impossibility of dismissing pupils. Pathways were impassable. Buses had ceased operation. Switchboards overflowed with frantic calls from guardians seeking updates. Consequently, Robert and his peers hunkered down through the afternoon, into the evening, and overnight. Educators improvised heroically. They gathered linens from the infirmary, scoured the lunchroom for remaining provisions, and converted the gym into an impromptu sleeping quarters using mats from the wrestling area. That evening, Robert bedded down beside his pal Jimmy, the pair sharing a single wool cover. It marked their first night apart from family. In the pitch black, they heard the gale rage beyond the walls, fretting over their loved one's safety. At daybreak, Robert's mom, Margaret, materialized at the entrance. She'd trudged 2 miles across snow, reaching her waist to claim him. Her skin glowed crimson from the chill, with icy trails of emotion streaking her face. As Robert dashed into her arms, she embraced him fiercely, leaving him short of breath. From then on, he never griped about those boots. Similar heartfelt gatherings unfolded citywide. Moms and kids, spouses reuniting, kinfolk torn asunder by the weather now bridging the gap in its wake. Fortune didn't smile on all, though, nor were divisions always chance occurrences. In districts housing Chicago's most disadvantaged, the onslaught compounded an already dire situation rather than merely disrupting it. The South Side in 1967 epitomized stark deprivation. Households crammed into dilapidated housing with fickle heating. Standard winters often left plumbing iced over. But this blizzard didn't stop at freezing. It wrecked the lines entirely. Within a structure on South Ellis Avenue, Thelma shouldered responsibility for 12 souls. A widow who'd been parenting since age 14, she was seasoned in weathering hardships, yet nothing had prepared her for this magnitude. Her building's furnace conked out on the storm's inaugural night. Indoor temps plummeted to 40 degrees, then 30 degrees. Her kids clustered under all the covers she had, shivering as she heated water on the stove to generate a bit of heat in the kitchen. They made it through, but just scarcely. Thelma would later describe those 3 days as the most endless ones she'd ever endured. She wasn't the only one struggling. In Chicago's low-income areas, households were battling identical hardships. Without warmth, without grocery shipments, without access to shops, even if they'd been operating. Assistance was nowhere in sight since the drifts blocked every route. The metropolis that appeared advanced, resourceful, and ready for any challenge had been humbled by the whiteout. Hitting the vulnerable hardest, those who started with so little. Yet there's something extraordinary about that tempest. Amid the chaos, with the urban sprawl gridlocked and lives slipping away, uncertain of the conclusion, residents of Chicago discovered methods to support one another. Unknown folks welcomed other unknowns into their residences. Local taverns transformed into crisis havens, offering complimentary hot drinks to whoever staggered inside. Faith centers handed out coverings and broth to all who required them, without expecting compensation. In a well-known episode, Southside teen athletes from the high school gridiron team devoted 2 days to clearing neighbors' vehicles from the buildup. They sought no payment. They anticipated no acclaim. They simply seized tools and started laboring. When questioned afterward about their motivation, one merely lifted his shoulders. "It had to be done," he remarked. "We happened to be nearby." That's how Chicago operates, the place that mastered endurance. The flakes ceased descending on Friday, January 27th. At that point, Chicago lay smothered beneath 23 inches of accumulation, the heaviest single-event dump since meteorological logs commenced. However, the tempest's halt didn't signal the ordeal's conclusion. Quite the opposite. The municipality confronted an overwhelming challenge: how to excavate for 3.5 million inhabitants. The resolution eventually emerged gradually, arduously, neighborhood by neighborhood. Mayor Richard J. Daley, the iconic overlord of Chicago's political scene, proclaimed a winter crisis and rallied every available apparatus under municipal control. Plows operated nonstop. Salting vehicles dispersed vast quantities of grit, leaving brownish marks on roadways that lingered for months. Still, it fell short. It was destined to fall short. The volume of white stuff overwhelmed the available gear to relocate it. Certain avenues went untreated for 7 days. Some districts endured a 10-day delay. Meanwhile, daily routines in Chicago crawled along at a mere sliver of usual speed. Enterprises remained shuttered. Educational institutions stayed closed. Trading at the Chicago Stock Exchange paused. The non-stop city had been frozen in place. The financial toll was immense. Manufacturing lines stalled. Shipments couldn't proceed. Merchants forfeited sums equivalent to millions in current dollars. O'Hare Airport, the globe's most trafficked at the time, shut down for several days. Tarmacs disappeared under the drifts. Countless flyers were marooned, bunking in concourses, subsisting on snack dispensers, anticipating departures that repeatedly got scrubbed. One voyager would later reminisce about 3 nights at O'Hare, immobile, grounded, powerless to act beyond biding time. In the finish, he noted, the lounge reeked like a gym bag, yet no one griped. What grounds for grievance? Everyone shared the predicament. That sentiment echoed repeatedly in Blizzard accounts. United in the struggle, bound as one. All enduring, all persisting, all anticipating resolution. And upon closure, all restoring. Beyond basic perseverance, tales from those icy stretches emerged that transcended simple endurance. Narratives folks shared with offspring and heirs. Accounts that shaped Chicagoans' sense of identity. Among them was a tale centered on an infant. On the night of January 26th, as the gale peaked ferociously, a resident named Patricia entered labor in her north side dwelling. Her spouse attempted summoning emergency services. The circuits overloaded. He endeavored transporting her by vehicle to medical care. Their ride was entombed, leaving him one option. He commenced trekking. He bore his expectant partner across thigh-deep powder, stride after stride, avenue after avenue, amid howling gusts and pelting flurries, her labored cries punctuating each surge. After an eternity, they arrived at a station house. The crew assessed Patricia instantly and realized delay was impossible amid the onslaught. They brought the child into the world there in the facility as the gale raged beyond the walls. A robust daughter, 7 pounds 6 ounces, entering a chilled realm, encircled by unfamiliar allies who instantly formed kin. They dubbed her Stormy. Whether accurate remains unclear, but the anecdote circulated for years. Perhaps it encapsulated Chicago's ordeal, the persistence of vitality amid catastrophe, the transformation of outsiders into allies when necessity demanded. Yet another saga that achieved mythic status concerned the South Shore Line, one of the passenger rail routes linking Chicago out in the fringes of the city. Then the blizzard struck, leaving a commuter train with hundreds of riders immobilized midway between stops. Snowdrifts piled so high the locomotive couldn't advance. Gale force winds prevented any rescue efforts. For a full 18 hours, those passengers remained confined inside that rail car, without provisions, with only scant warmth, and utterly clueless about when aid might arrive. What unfolded after that proved extraordinary. Rather than descend into disorder, the folks on board pulled together. They carefully divided up the sparse snacks on hand, making sure kids got the chocolate treats and biscuits before anyone else. They huddled in the central sections of the cars to trap whatever body heat they could. They lifted voices in tunes to boost morale. An off-duty nurse who was traveling scanned each carriage, tending to those who looked unwell and providing whatever solace she could muster. One fellow handed his heavy coat to a trembling older lady. A bunch of unfamiliar faces transformed into a tight-knit group. By the time the rescue team broke through the following dawn, they braced for mayhem. What they encountered instead was a weary, famished, chilled crowd that had looked after one another all through the ordeal. No fatalities occurred aboard. No one suffered grave injuries either, simply because amid the collapse, everyday individuals stepped up to keep things intact. That's the profound lesson the 1967 blizzard imparted to Chicago about its own character. The place had grit. That much was obvious. Yet what kind of grit? The tempest revealed it clearly. Not the unyielding sort of a barrier, but the resilient bond of kinfolk, worn down yet enduring, divided yet inevitably reconnecting. Clearing the mess dragged on for weeks. Financial damages soared into the hundreds of millions in current terms. The psychological wounds lingered far beyond. For years to come, locals gauged each winter blast by comparing it to the '67 event. Will it match the fury of '67? That query arose whenever flakes began to swirl. The reply stayed consistent. No tempest ever rivaled '67. Not the one in '79, not the blow in '99. None did. For the 1967 blizzard transcended mere weather. It exposed a metropolis blindsided. It highlighted the peril of overconfidence from assuming you've weathered it all. It delivered the jolt of realizing otherwise. Keep in mind, back in 1967, predicting the skies was worlds apart from modern methods. Absent were orbiting cameras, no radar systems monitoring fronts live, no mobile notifications urging folks to hunker down. Updates came via daily newsprint or broadcasts. And on January 26th, the experts predicted buildup of 4 to 8 inches, easing by nightfall. Chicago, however, faced 23 inches whipped by 50 miles per hour gusts. Far from waning, the onslaught grew fiercer with each passing hour, defying projections of improvement. That rift between prediction and truth claimed lives. Workers headed out since reports assured normalcy. Parents dispatched youngsters to classes on the promise of mild conditions. Drivers hit the roads, expecting light buildup. Once the error dawned, escape proved impossible. The '67 blizzard reshaped Chicago's views on meteorology, readiness, and the chasm separating forecasts from fate. In its wake, officials poured resources into superior plowing gear, enhanced alert networks, and refined guidelines for shutting down education and businesses. Those insights came at a steep price: ice-locked roads, immobilized travelers, and roughly 60 fatalities. Still, they stuck. And one more factor elevated this event's significance: something deeper than tools, procedures, or city layouts. The blizzard of '67 erupted during a time of sharp fractures in Chicago. The urban center grappled with racial inequities and economic divides that would erupt into violence the next year, as unrest tore through districts following Martin Luther King Jr.'s killing. Come January 1967, those strains bubbled under the surface. The South Side clashed with the North Side, black communities against white ones, the prosperous versus the struggling, realms parted by barriers tougher than stone. Yet the blizzard ignored such divides. Flurries blanketed affluent blocks and run-down areas equally. Opulent homes along Lakeshore Drive vanished under drifts just like Southside apartments. Elevated trains stalled regardless of whether they ferried suits or custodians. Over 3 days, Chicago fused in a rare solidarity, bound by common hardship, mutual doubt, collective resolve to endure. A black gentleman assisted a white household in freeing their vehicle. A white lady shared stew with her black neighbors. Youth from public housing frolicked in the powder with suburban peers. Everyone reveled in the school closures. Everyone crafted identical snow figures and waged the same flurried battles. It fixed no deep rifts. The splits resurfaced fiercely as thaws set in. But during that icy interlude, Chicago recalled that a metropolis comprises more than concrete and avenues. Its inhabitants, folks who rely on one another, watch, whether folks acknowledge it or not, and don't forget the kids. For grown-ups, that blizzard spelled disaster, a harrowing ordeal, a scar they'd bear for decades. But for the young ones, at least a few, it felt entirely different. Clear's throat. A girl of 7 from the outskirts penned her recollections of that tempest years later in a personal account. She recalled her dad returning from his job, eyebrows frosted over with ice. She thought back to trudging alongside her mom to the nearby shop, towing a sled since the vehicle was useless. She recalled rousing the following day to find drifts piled up against her window pane. Her initial reaction: the planet had morphed into an enchanted realm. She reminisced about constructing a snow fort in the rear yard alongside her sibling, crafting snow figures until her winter gear was drenched, sipping warm chocolate as her mom whipped up flapjacks infused with crispy bacon bits. To her, the storm wasn't calamity, it was enchantment. Perhaps that's the essence of our humanity in tempests like this. One occurrence might spell ruin for someone and excitement for another, dread for a parent, awe for a youngster, something to dread and something to cherish. Often within one household or even one soul. Those who endured the '67 blizzard are in their 70s and 80s today, assuming they're around. A few lost family members that fateful week. Others came perilously close to perishing themselves. For some, it's the chill, the panic, and the interminable delay that linger. Yet others hold on to different memories. They recall communities rallying for one another, acquaintances forged from strangers, a metropolis uniting amid total chaos. They recall the hush once the gale subsided, that eerie, subdued stillness as the breeze fades, flakes settle, and existence pauses. They recall venturing out at dawn to behold their town reshaped, well-known avenues rendered alien, vehicles morphed into pale heaps, branches bowed beneath crushing loads, all the familiar sights blanketed in pristine white, and the realization, roughly 60 souls did not make it. We must honor their memory always. They set off for jobs, classes, and routine tasks on a typical Thursday, never to return. Yet hundreds of thousands more did prevail, for in that pale, frigid, frightful expanse, they resolved to support one another. That's the tale of the 1967 blizzard. 58 years back, Chicago turned to ice. Rail lines halted. Autos vanished under drifts. The urban hub that prided itself on handling winter learned it was utterly unprepared. And in that icy instant, during those grueling days, a truth emerged. Not merely concerning climate or urban life, but regarding humanity. Our potential when all systems crumble. Our transformation when the landscape goes blank. If you experienced January 1967 firsthand, or if your folks or elders did, those images remain sharp. Particulars might blur, but the emotions endure. Such recollections merit preservation. Pass them along. They serve as a nudge that cold seasons can still catch us off guard. Predictions can falter, and our advanced society proves more brittle than we'd admit. They underscore that amid collapse, our soul salvation lies in mutual aid. And they affirm that true heat doesn't stem from radiators, boilers, or sunlight piercing the gray. It arises from within us, from decisions taken in solitude with no reward in sight, from that fundamental, resilient, profound choice to lend a hand. The 1967 blizzard now belongs to the past. The drifts dissolved ages ago. Pathways were shoveled clear. The city reconstructed and pressed forward. But those who weathered it haven't let go. They bear it eternally. And perhaps now you do too. If the blizzard sticks in your mind, leave a note below with your tale. And kindly hit subscribe to push us toward 1,000. That's our key aim.